Hey guys, this is Eric Weingarten with Weingarten Racing. This video is a bit different from the normal ones you usually get. Usually I'm showing you like a cylinder head and some flow sheets or showing you a motor that I've dynoed and sharing the results with that. This one's different. So this one's more of a, you can call it classroom corner, I guess, or whatever. This is just a teaching opportunity I thought that would happen because several things have happened in the last few weeks and I'm like, man, that ain't right. So I thought, man, I need to do a video over this. So I'm gonna try and make it relatively short, but you know, sometimes I get a little long-winded, so bear with me. But the biggest thing is using data. What I mean by data is whether it be flow sheets from the flow bench or dyno sheets from dyno tests, how you use it is crucial and it gives away a lot of stuff. So these are the three big mistakes I see people using when they use the data. So the first one, and this is very large, is trying to compare data from different sources. So let me explain. I'll do a very generic one. Let's say I flow ahead on my flow bench here. The sign is digital 680, right? And let's say for whatever reason, we're just for ballpark numbers, we say that the head flows 300 CFM. Well, then that same head on someone else's bench that's across the country goes 320 CFM. Now mine's calibrated. I use a calibrated orifice plate and I check that pretty regularly, about once every 6 months. But let's say the other place doesn't, or even they do, and for whatever reason they read different. The problem with that is a lot of you like to compare numbers from different places. So what I mean by that is this. Let's say you're going to go buy a set of heads, and I hate to say it, but most people simply look at the flow numbers. Whichever one flows the most, that's the one they typically buy. So if you've got a flow bench in somewhere in the United States that's 20 CFM higher than what everyone else does, if you're comparing numbers to see which head you should buy because you're buying off flow numbers for whatever reason, and then you compare it to mine, which I think is truly honest. Of course, most flow bench people say the same thing too. And you compare them, like, well, that guy's only flowing 300, this one's throwing 320, and it's the same size runner and everything. This is the better head. I will buy X head. You can't do that. You simply can't. The best way to compare data is off the same source. This also applies not just to flow benches, it also applies to dyno data. And it's probably even more messed up than flow bench stuff. So for a flow bench, we can easily put a calibrated orifice on and flow it and get the same. Maybe we change our radius entry and that might change it a little bit. But for the most part, flow benches could be off quite a bit. As you could tell by a lot of the advertised flow numbers from big companies, do not do that on my bench. But for the most part, flow benches only have a few variables in mind. The dyno, it's the Wild West. So a lot of you like to look at my dyno data from all the dyno tests that I've done, say the LS, the small block Chevy, coming up the small block Ford, my big block Chevy that got tested, all those things, and then you compare them to another guy that's maybe on YouTube or somewhere else you saw it and their dyno numbers. And you're like, yours are way down. He must have a better piece. Your dyno numbers aren't near the same. And X did this and their did this. Why is yours not doing the same as theirs? And that's why I have to bring this up. So I'm going to bring up Richard Holder. Just don't take this as offense to him, but he's just really popular with it. I'm not knocking him. But a lot of Richard Holder's tests took place back when they were doing magazines. And I'm not saying he necessarily does this, but I myself have been involved in some magazine productions. And you're like, what do you mean? When Engine Masters was taking place, that was hosted by Popular Hot Rod Magazine. That's my first experience with the magazine stuff, and it's very eye-opening. Even that's a very limited scope, but compared to what they do. What I can tell you is, back in the day, magazines got the majority of the revenue and did not come from subscriptions. It came from sales ads. So like you might see an ad for AFR heads, Brodix heads, whatever, JAG, Summit, whatever. And those companies would pay a lot of money to purchase ad space. And then they would give products for those editors and publishers or whatever to do the dyno testing. And Richard Holder was involved in many. And I'm not accusing him of cheating. I'm just, hear me out on this. A lot of those, because they got products from the company, you don't necessarily want to show them sucking if a lot of your revenue comes from that company. Now, I'm not saying that's what he did, but I could tell you from here's the experience I could personally tell you. A certain spark plug company and a certain oil company at one time was involved in Engine Master Challenge. And what they were trying to do was promote their product. They had spent advertising money with the magazine and whatnot else. And their thing was, if you use it in the Engine Master competition and you won, you got money. So the people that won, what they like to do is they use as many products as they could from different manufacturers to make more money. But it sounds like, well, then they must be a good product. Not quite. That spark plug that was supposed to be making so much more power, majority of the people that actually got a contingency check, which means they won or got top 3 and got paid, they had one of those spark plugs in the hole out of 8 because they made more power with the others. But if you looked at strictly the magazine article, because they never mentioned that in the magazine, you would think that spark plug was worth them winning or losing. Same with the oil. They had this oil additive we had. They gave you like a pint. They literally put a cap full in, and that counted. And it looks like that oil additive added so much power that they won. It wasn't the case. So there's things that happen behind the scenes on all dyno stuff that you guys are not aware of. So when you're trying to compare those things, you don't know what happened behind the scenes. I try to give the most honest data because I am always upfront. When someone gave a product, like when AFR gave a set of cylinder heads, I'm always like, hey, this AFR gave me this, so you can take it for whatever it's worth. I didn't change the numbers. When Polymer Racing Products gave the dimpled carb spacers, I was like, they gave them, and I'm going to try them, and this is what it did. No one paid me to test those. They sent products, but I never got a dime to use for the actual paying for the dyno bill or anything else. So when you're comparing those numbers, keep in mind you're seeing a small little glimpse of what actually happened. And that's just a small part. That's just like that little part. What you may not know is how the dyno rooms were set up. Did one have a better exhaust evacuation? And I'm surprised not a single soul brought this up when I posted the small block Chevy that made 1056, the stock block one, stock rod, stock crank. It was pulling air from inside the room. We didn't vent it to the outside. There's no doubt that lost power. But had we vented it to the outside room, it would have made more, like pulled in the air from that. And yes, we had exhaust fans running, but going in there and getting your eyes burned from the methanol, that means that engine brought it in too. So certain facilities may have better ones and their numbers look better. So when you're trying to compare, well, this guy, say Richard Holdner, for example, and I'm just using you, Richard, I'm not knocking you in any way. But let's say Richard Holder tested XYZ cam, and then I test XYZ cam, but my results are different. Well, who's right? You know? The only thing I can say is, I'll tell you if I ever got paid for a company, paying me to ever do it, which hasn't happened yet, and I'll just throw up the numbers. His could be right, and mine could be right. And then, guess what? It was never about the cam. It was about something else. So, which brings me to point 2. This is the second biggest mistake people make when they look at dyno data. People are obsessed with trying to find stuff that confirms whatever they think to be correct. So maybe they got this wild hair that certain LSA is better than others. So then what they do is they search the internet to find what confirms what they think. That sounds great, except for you should also be looking for stuff that disproves what you think. Because if you look for just stuff that proves it, you ignore stuff that disproves it. And that's called confirmational bias. That means you're just ignoring the bad, you're just looking at the good. And that will lead you astray every time. So I've got an example of this, and I'm going to show you this here in a second. One of the commenters had said in the cam challenge, so the LS cam challenge that just took place in October, one of the commenters said the top 3 had 108 to 109 LSA. So I've got this list here, so bear with me. So the top 3 was NK Performance. He had 108.5 LSA. GPI was number 2, and he had a 109 LSA. And the third place was Joe Carroll, and he had 108 LSA. And if I just gave you those numbers there, and I said that was the top 3, you would say, just like that commenter did, that 108 LSA was the best for that engine. And you would have ignored everything else. Here's what I mean. Chris Straub, not making fun of you, Chris, just bear with me. His LSA was 109, and I think he finished 8th, not top 3. It gets better. David Vizard, he had a 108 LSA, and he finished 13th. Lucas Simeon had a 108 LSA, and he finished 19th. So if you just look at those facts, you would say, well, the top 3 108 LSA, that's what you should run. You just ignored that there were 3 others in this competition that did not do well. I mean, I wouldn't say they did horrible. I want to take that back. But they weren't top 3. So you just looked at what you wanted to see, ignored what you didn't want to see. Oh, and it gets worse. You see, I didn't test just 23 cams. I tested 28. Of those was one of mine. That one also had 108 LSA. I think it finished 24th out of 28. So if you're looking at strictly that one little nugget of knowledge, if you really looked at it, there's more that disproves than proves the 108 LSA was the winner for that deal. I, of course, said, which this is very hard to get across, and I think a lot of the cam guys are working very hard to try to teach people this, but even me, this is how I learned, so it's very tough too. LSA, it's an irrelevant number. It just comes from the open and closing points of the intake and exhaust. Whatever you move those points, that's going to change your LSA. So probably the better thing to look at would have been where the intake opened or where the exhaust closed. Those would have probably gave you a better glimpse of what was actually happening. So that makes, hopefully kind of gives you some ideas on why you can't just use one piece of a data and ignore everything else. I'll give you another example. So unfortunately, I don't have the book here, otherwise I would. This happened 2 years ago. So if you're watching this video and you're probably a new subscriber, I'm surprised you're even watching this because it's just me talking, but I really am trying to enlighten you. Probably 2 years ago, one of the tests I had was I did a small block Chevy. That was the first dyno mill that we had for this channel that was used to test different ideas. One of the first tests that was done was testing 23 different intake manifolds to see which was better. The engine itself only made like 570 horsepower, and I'll go ahead and bust your bubble. There were probably 10 of them that were so close it wouldn't have mattered. On the track, you probably would have seen very little difference in power, period. But at that time, one of the big things going around the internet, and it's been going around ever since, had to do with the finish of the intake manifold. Like when you port it, do you leave it a burr finish or do you leave it 60 grit? In case you're wondering, the cartridge rolls that you use to port and polish, you can get them in different grits. With 60 grit or a burr finish. Burr is what we use to take most of the metal out. Which one actually makes more power? Another head porter, which I respect, he had said, you know, burr is what I've been using because it makes more power. So, because that was out there, I thought, you know what, this would be a great opportunity to test it. So I'd already dynoed the Super Victor manifold for a small block Chevy in its as-cast form. The next thing I did, and the only thing I did, was burr finish it. Burr finish the entire thing. Went back on the dyno, and guess what? It picked up. Sure did. And if you just looked at that video, you'd have said, burr finish is the way to go, ignore everything else, that's money. It did pick up quite a bit, but I wanted to see if there wasn't something else. So what I did was, took the manifold back, and I 60 gritted the entire thing. So I went from standard finish, burr finish, to 60 grit. Put it back on the dyno, and guess what? It gained even more. So if you looked at between burr and 60 grit, the 60 grit looks better. So for those people that are like, hey, the burr finish is the magic ticket, look, it showed it on that. You ignored the fact that I also tested again with the 60 grit. But even me saying that, when I got done doing that test, I was like, crap. You know what that means? The port itself might have got slightly bigger because I did the 60 grit, and that might have been the power difference, not even the finish. Same with whenever I did burr. Maybe just grinding the burr made it slightly larger, so that gained the power, not the finish. The ultimate test would have been to go back to burr finish to see if it gained or lost. But what would have happened if it would have gained again, then gone back 60 grit and gained again? The whole time you've been chasing whether it was the finish or was it the size increase? But if you're people that just look at just what you want to confirm your theory, you would say no, Burr's better. Or someone could say no, 60 grit's better. I could say I can't tell from either. To me, it looks like it's a wash. But I still port my manifolds my way because I think it seems like it works well overall. So conformational bias is one of those things you really, 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 really need to watch out for. And the last thing has to do with probably the more controversial thing, is with people who use the data on the internet that they don't own. So let me explain. From all this dyno testing, I have been collecting data nonstop. And the bad part about this is because I test so much, I don't have as much time to actually look back at the data as much as I'd like to. Because you could literally spend weeks looking at one dyno session, looking at every little intricacy between the fuel flows, AFRs, your airflows. You could analyze it to death. Because I tested so often, I really didn't even have a chance to look at it. So I pretty much let the viewers just look at it. But even from the beginning, I had said, hey guys, don't take this as gospel, which really should be the third thing. Never take any of my stuff as gospel, period, ever. Because I didn't have a chance to look at all the data. I also didn't, because I was just simply testing too much. I just let the viewers kind of figure it out. But I said, please don't take this as gospel. Go look at other sources and see if it confirms it, to avoid the conformational bias thing. But what ended up happening was this. Several other YouTube channels have started, and what they like to do is they will use other people's data to confirm their wild theories. Sometimes they might be somewhat close, and sometimes they're just garbage. To make matters worse for me on this deal, that makes me kind of upset about the thing is, this data, say for instance, the LS data, I charged people for. So for people that donated to the CAM challenge for the LS, it cost 20 bucks and they got all the data. That data was for them because they donated, not for someone else that they could hand it off to. That was for them. That money went to the winner, and then also went to pay for the dyno bill. The other data that I had from all the other dyno tests, those were sold to people. So if I got done doing a dyno test and say, hey, do you want a PDF? It'd be 20 bucks or something. And a lot of people purchased that. I have no problem with that. If those people who had purchased the data wanted to make a video about what they thought about data, I'm cool as could be. That doesn't bother me one bit. A prime example was this one. Charles Sorvino, I know I got your name wrong. I had tested his manifold in this book, this LS book, which by the way, it's no longer in print. And the reason why is this damn thing cost $110 to print. So I made 50 bucks on each one I sold. But anyway, he had purchased, he had donated one. So he donated to the challenge. He also sent in a manifold for me to test. So I'm of the opinion if you send me something to test, you don't have to pay for the data. I'm going to give it to you. You have the right to that. Which, sidebar, if there's something you want to see tested and you have the product to test it, if I can make it happen, I will. And usually it doesn't cost you anything, but sometimes it might. Like if you were like, I want to find out this week, well then I'm going to have to pay for a dyno session this week. Otherwise I can't squeeze it in others. But anyway, Charlie had sent in a manifold, do you mind testing? I said, I don't mind as long as you pay the return shipping. Sure. He purchased the dyno data. So he paid his 20 bucks for that anyway. I gave him the data. Here's the proper thing to do. Charlie emails me, I don't know, a month later, says, do you mind if I use the stuff from the dyno stuff for my own video? No, I don't have a problem at all. And he goes off and makes a video. What others have done is they didn't even buy the $20 donation to get the data. So instead they went to someone else, got their data, because you're just being a friend, you're just giving away, which again, it's like Microsoft Office. You purchase it, it's for you. You can't use it on others. That's how I feel about it. Because you really, once you do that, I can't test as much, which means you can't see as much. So you're kind of hurting everybody. But there are other channels that got it and then used it. And then to make matters worse, they're using pictures from this book in their video that they didn't buy in their video to discuss what they think is the best cam timing because it's dyno proven. They didn't dyno prove it. They weren't there. I'm sorry. I didn't see him working. I didn't see him working with Gary. The only person that was there was Gary, me, and the guy that did the barbecue sauce. And he wasn't really working. He was just working the cameras, which thankfully, if you're watching this, thank you. And he provided food. You weren't there. They didn't dyno prove them from you. You're just using other people's data again. But anyway, to use that data to come up with their wild ass ideas of what the perfect spots will be, they don't even know the background of any of it. But they made the whole video, gets a bunch of views, never paid for the data, and worst off, they didn't mention me in the video. They're like, well, I mentioned you in a previous video. I need to give a little plagiarism lesson on this deal. When you were in school and you had to write a paper, which I think they still do, my son does, when you have to use a source, you have to cite the source every time you use it. Not just one time and it's done. It doesn't work that way. This material isn't open source, so you'd have to get permission anyway. But even if you did, you have to cite it. So they're like, Cam Challenge. This is from the Cam Challenge. Who's Cam Challenge? You forgot the name. Plus, they were abusing the data. And I mean by that, I was like, that poor data. I'm sorry. I did not mean to treat you that way. Using it as absolutes as if they were there and knew what all happened in between and all the other tests that went on. You can't do that. Worse off is some of those channels will then also use data from other people's channel. And if you remember back to point one, you cannot compare two different dynos. One that's run by maybe a magazine or someone trying to sell you shit versus me who's just trying to break even on paying for a dyno session. You can't compare those. But they did. It doesn't work that way. And a lot of the YouTube channels exist that have never actually made content. Their content's based off of everybody else's content. And this isn't even just necessarily race stuff. You could probably go on right, same with TikTok. How many TikTok videos do you see? It's a response to someone else's TikTok. Like, I saw one yesterday, and I know I'm getting ranting here. There was a guy who was showing his reaction to a guy who's showing his reaction to a guy that tried to make Oreos burn. You probably saw it when he pulled the torch to an Oreo for 30 seconds and it didn't burn. My only thought was, why didn't they use that on the space shuttle? But anyway, that guy, it's just that way. And his whole thing is he never made content. He's just using others. YouTube's just like that. Go to the source. Go to the one that's actually creating it. So, and by the way, if you're like, well, you dick, you could have just let him use it. I would have. That's the thing too. If they just would have asked. It's like, I would never say to someone, hey, if they wrote me up and said, hey man, can I use your data in a video? I'd be like, sure. You asked. I'm not that, like, I'm not withholding data so nobody can see it. Obviously, I put it on my channel. But if you want to make a video, fine, just ask. I guess it's because I grew up in Oklahoma in a farming community, and the way we view things is pretty simple. If you take someone else's stuff without asking, that's theft. If you paid for something, that's cool. If you borrowed something and then let someone else borrow it, that's not cool. If we have anything that we can give you to help you, you just have to ask. And usually we do it. That's just how I am. I'm sure most people are too. But I know it was a little bit longer video. I thought I was going to make it shorter, and I can't see the time frame from back there. And I know you got to look at my ugly mug this whole time, but remember these 3 important facts. 3 important. Very, 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 very important. So much so that I'm trying to remember as I'm talking. Point 1. Don't compare data from different sources. Just don't. 2. Don't try to look for only positives that confirm your theory. It'll lead you down a bad rabbit hole. And 3, it's okay to look at other YouTube channels that use the data that someone else created, but it's better to look at the YouTube channel that actually created the data. So, anyway, that's all I got for today. Sorry if it went a little long-winded. Just use the data better. And by the way, if you made it this far, thank you. So I'm gonna give you a little helpful hint on this. Because most of this is based off camshafts, I think a majority of you, what you're doing is, you're like, hey, I've got an engine. I need a camshaft for it. So I'm gonna look at online and find an engine that's close to what I've got. And then I'm gonna see what cam they have, and that's the cam I'm gonna try to get. But a lot of times, those cams that you see that they're running online, the engine similar to yours, is a custom cam. And then you're gonna look and you're like, okay, that's a custom cam. I don't wanna pay $600-700 for a custom cam. I wanna get a shelf cam. So I'm gonna find a shelf cam that's close, and that's what I'm gonna run. Watch my videos. If you watch the Urson cam, its specs are so close to the guy that finished third, like really, really close, and it sucked. And that's not because of Urson. Urson just did a regrind, they did me a solid. But there are custom, and even that, there was another one that was a shelf cam from another company, which I won't mention, that was close. It was close, but it was a shelf cam, and everybody could have bought it. It didn't do near as well as the top three, even though the specs were close. So there's a real downside to trying to look online, find an engine close to yours, see what cam they're running, and then trying to get a shelf cam to match that for yourself. A huge disadvantage. I would say please, and I sell cams, I truly do, but not as many as you'd think. Probably, I don't know, 5 in a month, if that. But I would say this is not a huge cam seller. You really should save your pennies and try to get a custom cam. You know, try to find a shelf cam that's close. I know sometimes it's just impossible. You know, life sneaks up. Medical bills are high, food's high, gas is going up. I guess the prices of heads will probably go up because he put a tariff on aluminum and Canada, which happens to be the source where most of aluminum for America comes from. But trying to save your money so that you can get the one that you want. Don't regret the wrong decision. So again, long-winded, sorry. Guys, thanks for watching. Remember, don't pour cast iron heads. I am no Superman. I did rated Superboy though. And you guys take care.